Zentar pressed his 4 hands against the cold metal wall and tried to stop shaking. Outside, the sounds of death grew louder. Screaming metal, explosions, the horrible clicking sounds that the Void Swarm made when they hunted. The mining colony of Kepler 442c had been his home for 5 years. It was a simple place, far from the busy worlds of the Zephyrian Empire. Just rocks and metal and hard work? Zentar liked it that way. He was not a warrior or a politician. He was an engineer who fixed machines and kept the mines running. But now the machines were broken. The defenses were gone. And the swarm was here. Zentar looked through the small window in the blast door. The colony's main street was covered in a green slime that burned everything it touched. 3 of his friends lay dead near the communications building. Their bodies were already dissolving. "How many are left?" asked Velkara. She was young, barely past her first molting. Her blue scales had turned pale with fear. 15, Zentar said. Maybe less. The evacuation ships had taken most of the colonists, but the last ship had exploded just after takeoff. A swarm bioship had caught it with some kind of acid spray. Zentar watched it fall like a burning star. Now they were trapped in the central mining facility. The blast doors were strong, but they would not hold forever. Through the security cameras, Zentar could see the swarm drones working. They looked like giant insects, but worse. Their shells were black and shiny. They had too many legs and too many teeth. And they moved with a purpose that made his blood cold. The drones were not random killers. They were part of something bigger. Something that thought and planned and consumed entire worlds. The Void Swarm had eaten 3 star systems already. Billions of beings gone without a trace. What do we do? Velkara whispered. Zentar did not know. The emergency beacon was still broadcasting, but help would not come. The Imperial fleet was fighting the swarm in a dozen other places. They could not spare ships for one small mining colony. An alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the facility. One of the blast doors was failing. "They are through the east entrance," said Mordek, an old miner with scars on his arms. "We have maybe 10 minutes. The others looked at Zentar like he had answers. He was the senior engineer. But all his training had not prepared him for this. He knew how to fix power cores and operate mining equipment. He did not know how to fight monsters from the dark between stars. "The emergency tunnel," he said finally. "It leads to the backup power station. We might be able to reach the landing pad." "And then what?" Mordek asked. "The ships are gone. Then we die fighting instead of hiding," Zentar said. It was not much of a plan, but it was better than waiting for the swarm to break down their door. They gathered what weapons they could find. Mining tools, mostly. A few emergency blasters that were meant for clearing rock slides. Zentar picked up a plasma cutter and checked its charge. It was designed to slice through metal, not alien monsters. But it would have to do. The emergency tunnel was dark and narrow. They moved in single file, following the faint glow of emergency lights. Behind them, the sounds of tearing metal grew louder. The blast doors were falling. Zentar tried not to think about his family. His mate and their 2 younglings lived on the homeworld, safe in the inner systems. At least he hoped they were safe. The swarm moved fast. Faster than anyone had expected. They reached the backup power station just as the lights went out behind them. The facility's main power core had been destroyed. Emergency power would last another hour, maybe 2. Through the station's windows, Zentar could see the landing pad. It was empty except for twisted metal that had once been cargo shuttles. The swarm bioships hung in the sky like dark clouds. They pulsed with their own sick light. "Look," Velkara pointed to one of the bioships. "It is coming down." The ship was huge, easily a kilometer long. It moved without any visible engines, flowing through the air like something alive. Because it was alive, Zentar remembered. The swarm did not build their ships. They grew them. The bioship settled onto the landing pad with a wet sound. Parts of it began to open like flowers. But instead of petals, drones poured out. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. "This is where we make our stand," Zentar said. He was surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "For the Empire. For our families. For everyone who could not run." The others nodded. Even Velkara straightened her shoulders and checked her weapon. They were going to die. They all knew it. But they would not die as prey. Zentar activated the emergency beacon one last time. It was probably useless. Even if someone heard it, they could not arrive in time. But maybe it would warn other colonies. Maybe their deaths would save someone else. The first drones reached the power station. They moved like liquid shadow, flowing around obstacles and through openings that seemed too small. Up close, they were even more terrible. Their eyes were black holes that seemed to swallow light. Their mouths had rows of teeth like broken glass. "Wait for my signal," Zentar whispered. The drones paused at the station's entrance. They tilted their heads like they were listening to something, probably getting orders from the hive mind. The swarm never acted alone. Every drone was part of a larger consciousness that spanned star systems. Then they attacked. Zentar fired his plasma cutter at the first drone through the door. The beam cut through its shell like it was made of paper. Green fluid sprayed everywhere. But 3 more drones rushed in behind it. The battle was chaos. Blaster fire lit up the small station. The drones moved too fast, striking from angles that should have been impossible. Mordic fell first, pulled down by a drone that seemed to appear from nowhere. Then 2 of the younger miners. Zentar backed toward the rear wall, still firing. His plasma cutter was overheating. In a few more seconds, it would shut down automatically. Around him, his friends and co-workers were dying. He thought about his family again, about the quiet mornings on the homeworld, when he would sit with his mate and watch their younglings play in the garden, simple moments that he had taken for granted. A drone leaped at him. He swung the plasma cutter like a club, catching it in the side. It screamed and fell, but another took its place immediately. This was how it ended, not in glory or heroism, but in a small power station on a forgotten world. He closed his eyes and began the death prayer of his people. "Guide my spirit to the stars beyond," he whispered. "Let my sacrifice have meaning." The drone's claws reached for his throat, and then the sky exploded. Thunder rolled across the landscape like the voice of an angry god. Light brighter than the colony's main star blazed through the windows. The drone attacking Zentar suddenly stopped and turned toward the noise. Outside, something was falling from the sky. Many somethings. They looked like metal stars trailing fire and smoke as they plummeted toward the surface. The drones in the power station suddenly went still. Their heads turned up toward the ceiling like they were listening to new orders. Then as one, they turned and rushed back outside. Zentar stumbled to the window and looked out. The bioships in orbit were burning. Pieces of them fell like deadly rain. And still more metal objects dropped from the sky, smashing into the landing pad with impacts that shook the ground. As the smoke cleared, shapes emerged from the crash sites. They were smaller than Zephyrians but moved with deadly purpose. They carried weapons that spit fire and made sounds like thunder, and they were winning. The explosions kept coming. Each one shook the ground so hard that Zentar had to hold onto the window frame to stay standing. Through the smoke and fire, he watched something impossible happen. The Void Swarm was losing. For 3 years, the galaxy had lived in terror of these creatures. They moved from system to system like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Entire fleets had fallen before them. Whole civilizations had vanished without a trace, but now they were running. The bioships that had seemed so terrifying just minutes ago were breaking apart in the sky. Burning chunks of organic matter rained down on the colony. The smaller ships that carried the drones were fleeing back toward space, leaving thousands of their own kind behind. "What is happening?" Velkara whispered. She was bleeding from a cut on her arm, but she was alive. Only 5 of them had survived the drone attack. "I do not know," Zentar said, but he could not look away from the scene outside. More metal objects were falling from the sky. They hit the ground with tremendous force, each impact creating a small crater. But these were not random debris. They were landing in a pattern, strategic positions around the colony. As the dust settled, Zentar saw them clearly for the first time. They were pods of some kind, made from metal he did not recognize. Each one was about the size of a small transport vehicle, and they were opening. The beings that emerged were unlike anything in the galactic databases. They stood on 2 legs like Zephyrians, but they were smaller and built differently. Their skin was covered in some kind of armor that looked both advanced and practical. They moved with efficiency that reminded Zentar of the swarm drones. But there was something else. Something that made his scales prickle with recognition. These were predators. The first group of strange beings had barely left their pod when swarm drones attacked them. Zentar counted at least 20 drones converging on just 4 of the newcomers. It should have been a massacre, instead it was beautiful. The strangers moved like they had fought together for years. They did not panic or bunch up like most species did when attacked. Instead, they spread out and created overlapping fields of fire. Their weapons made sharp cracking sounds and sent projectiles faster than the eye could follow. The drones that had seemed so unstoppable minutes ago fell like grain before a harvester. But it was not just the weapons. These beings fought with a ferocity that matched the swarm's own. When one of them ran out of ammunition, he pulled out a blade and engaged a drone in close combat. The drone was larger and had natural weapons that could cut through metal. But the stranger was faster and smarter. He ducked under the creature's claws and drove his blade up into its soft underside. Green fluid sprayed everywhere. Incredible, Mordek said. The old miner was staring through another window. Look at them fight. All across the colony, similar battles were taking place. The strangers had landed in perfect positions to cut off the swarm's retreat routes. They worked together with a coordination that rivaled the hive mind itself. But unlike the swarm, each of them seemed to think independently. One group of the beings was advancing toward the power station. Zentar could see them through the main window, moving from cover to cover with practiced skill. They cleared each building methodically, making sure no drones were left behind them. They are coming here, Velkara said. She raised her blaster with shaking hands. No, Zentar said. Look at how they move. They are not hunting us. They are hunting the swarm. He was right. As the group approached the power station, they ignored the Zephyrian refugees completely. Their attention was focused on a group of drones that had taken shelter behind some mining equipment. The lead stranger raised his hand. The others stopped moving immediately. He pointed to different positions and they spread out without making a sound. Then he pulled something small from his belt and threw it toward the drones. The explosion was precise and controlled. It killed all 5 drones without damaging any of the mining equipment. These beings did not just have advanced weapons. They knew how to use them. Contact, one of them said. The universal translator struggled with their language. It was harsh and full of sharp sounds. 5 hostiles down. Sector 7 clear. Copy that, Rodriguez, came a reply from somewhere else. Proceed to civilian shelter. Check for survivors. They knew about the refugees. Somehow they had identified the power station as a civilian shelter. How was that possible? The lead stranger approached the station's entrance. He was smaller than Zentar but moved with complete confidence. His armor was scratched and scorched from battle, but he seemed uninjured. He stopped at the door and removed his helmet. Zentar's breath caught in his throat. The being's face was almost bare of natural armor. His skin was pale and soft-looking. His eyes faced forward like a predator's, but they were not the cold black pits of the swarm. They were warm and brown and very much alive. Hello, the stranger said. The translator made his voice sound formal, but there was something gentle in his tone. I am Sergeant Rodriguez of the Terran Expeditionary Force. Are you injured? Terran? Zentar had never heard of such a species. What is a Terran? We are from Earth, Rodriguez said. We received your distress signal. Sorry, we are late. Zentar looked out at the burning swarm ships and the bodies of destroyed drones. If this was late, he could not imagine what early would look like. Rodriguez stepped inside and looked around the power station. His eyes took in everything. The damage from the battle, the wounded Zephyrians, the improvised weapons they had used to defend themselves. You fought them, he said. It was not a question. We tried, Zentar said. We are not warriors. No, Rodriguez agreed. But you stood your ground. That takes courage. He spoke into a device on his wrist. Medical team to Sector 7. We have wounded civilians. Within minutes, 2 more Terrans arrived carrying equipment that looked like medical scanners. They went to work on the injured Zephyrians immediately, using tools that seemed far more advanced than anything in the Empire's hospitals. Your wounds are not serious, one of them told Velkara as he sealed the cut on her arm. But you should rest. You have been through trauma. How did you know we were here? Zentar asked Rodriguez. Heat signatures, the sergeant said. Our ship scanned the colony before we landed. We could see where the civilians were hiding. Your ships? Rodriguez smiled. It was a strange expression, showing his teeth. But somehow it did not seem threatening. Take a look outside. The battle is almost over. Zentar went to the window again. The sky was clear except for a few small swarm ships fleeing toward the outer system. But now he could see other shapes up there, sleek vessels that had not been there before. They moved with impossible grace, herding the fleeing bioships like predators driving prey. How many of you are there? Zentar asked. This unit? About 500, Rodriguez said. But there are more coming. A lot more, 500. They had defeated an entire swarm invasion force with just 500 soldiers. Centaur had trouble believing it. Why? He asked, and why did you come? We are not part of your empire. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the devastated colony, at the bodies of both Zephyrians and swarm creatures scattered across the landing pad. Because someone sent a distress call, he said finally, and we heard it. It was such a simple answer. But in those few words, Centaur heard something that changed everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. There were people out there who came when you called for help, not because they had to, not because they gained something from it, but because it was the right thing to do. The swarm will return, Centaur said. They always do. You cannot stay here forever. Rodriguez's smile became sharper, more predatory. We are not planning to stay, he said. We are planning to follow them home. Centaur woke up in a bed that was too small for him. His body ached in places he had forgotten could hurt, but he was alive, and that seemed like a miracle. The medical bay was clean and bright, much cleaner than it had been before the attack. Someone had repaired the damaged equipment and replaced the broken lights. The air smelled of disinfectant and something else, something that reminded him of growing things. You are awake, said a voice. Good. I was starting to worry. Centaur turned his head and saw Rodriguez sitting in a chair beside the bed. The human sergeant looked tired but alert. His armor had been replaced with simple clothing that looked practical rather than military. How long was I unconscious? Centaur asked. 18 hours, Rodriguez said. You were exhausted, and you had some injuries you probably did not notice during the fighting. Centaur looked down at himself. Someone had bandaged cuts on his arms and legs. He did not remember getting hurt, but the battle was mostly a blur of fear and desperation. The others? All alive, Rodriguez said. Velkara is helping in the communications center. She has a talent for languages. Mordic is working with our engineers to assess the mining equipment. And the swarm? Gone, for now. Rodriguez stood up and walked to the window. But they will be back. They always come back. Through the window, Centaur could see human soldiers moving around the colony. They worked with quiet efficiency, setting up defensive positions and repairing critical systems. Their movements were precise and purposeful. These were people who knew their jobs well. I have questions, Centaur said. I thought you might. Rodriguez pulled his chair closer to the bed. Ask whatever you want. I will answer what I can. What are humans? I have never heard of your species. We are from a planet called Earth, Rodriguez said. It is far from here, outside the boundaries of all the known empires. We have been watching the galactic community for some time, but we chose not to make contact until now. Why now? Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was harder. Because the swarm changed the rules. They do not just conquer territory or resources. They consume everything. Entire biospheres. Billions of years of evolution gone forever. Centaur understood. The swarm was not just another aggressive species competing for space and resources. They were something worse. They were entropy given form. How did you learn our language so quickly? We have been monitoring galactic communications for decades, Rodriguez said. We learned your languages before you knew we existed. It seemed like a good idea to understand our neighbors. But why did you not reveal yourselves sooner? The galactic community would have welcomed new members. Rodriguez smiled, but it was not a happy expression. Would they? Humans are predators, Centaur. We evolved from hunters on a world that tried very hard to kill us. Most species find us disturbing. Centaur thought about the battle he had witnessed, the casual efficiency with which the humans had destroyed the swarm drones, the way they moved like pack hunters, coordinating without apparent communication. You are frightening, he admitted, but so is the swarm, and you chose to help us instead of consuming us. That is the difference, Rodriguez said. We choose. A young human soldier appeared in the doorway. She was smaller than Rodriguez, but carried herself with the same confident posture. Sergeant, we have a situation, she said. The Zephyrian fleet just dropped out of hyperspace. 3 battlecruisers and a carrier group. Rodriguez sighed. How far out? 6 hours at current approach speed. They are demanding to speak with whoever is in charge here. Tell them I will talk to them, Centaur said. He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. I am the senior surviving member of the colonial administration. You are injured, Rodriguez said. Rest, I will handle this. No. Centaur forced himself upright despite the pain. They will want to know what happened here. And they will want to know about you. I should be the one to tell them. Rodriguez studied him for a moment. You understand that this first contact could go badly. Your people might see us as invaders rather than rescuers. Then I will have to convince them otherwise. 3 hours later, Zentar stood in the colony's main conference room, facing a holographic projection of Fleet Admiral Kethvara. The admiral's scales were the deep purple of high nobility, and her 4 eyes glittered with suspicion. Explain to me, she said, how a minor mining colony not only survived a swarm assault, but managed to destroy an entire biofleet. We had help, Zentar said simply. From whom? There were no Imperial forces in this sector. Rodriguez stepped into view of the holographic projector. From us, Admiral. Kethvara's eyes went wide. What are you? Your species is not in any database. We are humans from the planet Earth, Rodriguez said. We received the colony's distress signal and responded. Impossible. Earth is a myth, a theoretical world that might exist beyond the galactic rim. Not theoretical, Rodriguez said calmly. Very real. For the next hour, Zentar watched as Rodriguez explained humanity's existence to the increasingly stunned Admiral. He showed recordings of the battle, demonstrated human technology, and patiently answered dozens of questions. Why should we trust you? Kethvara asked finally. You claim to be peaceful, but you fight like demons. We fight like humans, Rodriguez corrected. We are capable of great violence when necessary, but we choose when and how to use that capability. And what do you want in return for your assistance? Rodriguez looked at Zentar before answering. To help stop the swarm. They are a threat to all life in the galaxy. That includes us. You would fight alongside us, if you will have us. Admiral Kethvara was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was thoughtful. I will need to consult with the High Council. This is beyond my authority to decide, but... She paused. The recordings you have shown me are remarkable. Your weapons technology appears to be significantly advanced. It is different, Rodriguez said. Not necessarily better, just different. We have had to develop solutions to problems that other species might not face. What kind of problems? Rodriguez's expression became grim. Earth is not a gentle world, Admiral. Our evolution was shaped by constant conflict. Ice ages, volcanic winters, extinction events. We learned to adapt or die. And that made you warriors. It made us survivors. Warriors are just one tool in our kit. After the call ended, Zentar sat down heavily. The conversation had been exhausting and his injuries were still healing. Do you think she will recommend alliance? Rodriguez asked. I do not know, Zentar said honestly. The Council is conservative. They fear change. And you? You are definitely change. What do you recommend we do? Zentar thought about it. About the fear in Velkara's eyes when the drones attacked. About the moment when he thought he was going to die alone on a forgotten world. About the thunder from the sky that had saved them all. Be patient, he said finally. Show them what you showed me. That humans are dangerous, yes. But dangerous to the right people. Rodriguez nodded. We can do that. There is something else, Zentar said. I want to formally request assignment as liaison between our species. If that is acceptable to both sides, why? Zentar looked out the window at the humans working to repair his home. They moved with purpose and efficiency, but also with care. They had risked their lives for people they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. Because someone needs to help both sides understand each other, he said. And I think I'm starting to understand what makes humans special. What is that? You choose to be good, Zentar said. Despite everything evolution made you. Despite all the violence you are capable of, you choose to be better. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled that strange human smile. I hope you are right, he said, because the real war is just beginning. 6 months after first contact, Zentar stood on the bridge of the human dreadnought Indomitable and watched something that should have been impossible. The combined fleet was retreating, not running. Retreating. There was a difference according to the humans. All ships, maintain formation. Admiral Chen's voice was calm over the communications channel. Execute withdrawal pattern Delta 7 on my mark. Through the viewports, Zentar could see the swarm biofleet pursuing them. Dozens of the massive organic ships, their hulls pulsing with that sick inner light. They had taken the bait perfectly. Admiral, reported the tactical officer. Enemy fleet is following as predicted. They are increasing speed. Let them, Chen said. Patience is a virtue. Centaur had learned much about human virtues in the past months. Patience was only one of them. Others included adaptability, stubbornness, and something the translator could only render as tactical creativity. He was serving as official liaison between the Terran Expeditionary Force and the combined galactic fleet. It was a position that required him to understand both sides. But the humans remained a puzzle that fascinated him. They fought wars like no other species in the galaxy. 60 seconds to the kill zone, announced another officer. The kill zone was Admiral Chen's idea. While the swarm thought they were chasing a defeated enemy, they were actually being led into a carefully prepared trap. Hidden among the asteroids of the Proxima Nexus system were weapon platforms, mines, and support ships. All ships prepare for immediate course change, Chen ordered. Remember, we need to clear the field of fire within 30 seconds. Centaur gripped his safety harness as the massive ship suddenly pivoted. The human vessels moved with impossible precision, executing a coordinated turn that brought them safely clear of the kill zone, just as the swarm fleet entered it. Fire, Chen said quietly. Space erupted in light and fury. The hidden weapons opened fire from a dozen different angles. Plasma beams, kinetic projectiles, and exotic energy weapons that Centaur could not identify. The leading swarm ships simply vanished, overwhelmed by the concentrated firepower. But it was not just the weapons that impressed him. It was the coordination. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species, all moving as one. The humans had somehow welded the fractious galactic fleet into a single fighting force. How do you do it? Centaur asked Chen as the battle continued. The Zephyrians have been trying to coordinate multi-species fleets for centuries. It never works this well, Chen smiled. She was a small woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. We cheat, she said. Cheat? We use human coordination methods, but we adapt them for each species. Zephyrians need clear hierarchy and formal protocols. Altarians work better with loose guidelines and individual initiative. The Centauran hive ships require completely different command structures. But how do you manage all those different approaches at once? Practice, Chen said. And the understanding that different does not mean wrong. Just different. It was a very human perspective Centaur had learned. They seemed to have an instinctive grasp of the idea that multiple solutions could exist for the same problem. The battle at Proxima Nexus was a perfect example. Any other species would have met the swarm fleet head-on, trading losses until one side was defeated. Humans had studied the enemy's behavior patterns and used their own aggression against them. Enemy fleet is breaking off, reported the tactical officer. 15 bioships destroyed, 8 damaged and retreating. Let them go, Chen ordered. We have what we came for. What they had come for was intelligence. During the battle, human infiltration teams had boarded several swarm ships and planted monitoring devices. For the first time, they would be able to track the swarm's movements and perhaps learn more about their origins. Admiral, Centaur said, I have a question about human tactics. Ask away. In every engagement I have observed, you could have achieved victory with superior firepower. Your weapons are more advanced than anything the swarm has. Why do you always choose more complex strategies? Chen was quiet for a moment, watching the retreating swarm ships. Because overwhelming force is not always the best solution. Yes, we could probably destroy any swarm fleet we encounter. But what about the ships we do not encounter? What about the worlds they attack while we are busy with direct confrontation? I do not understand. We are not just trying to win battles, Centaur. We are trying to win the war. That means making the swarm react to us instead of acting on their own initiative. Every time they have to respond to our moves, they are not making moves of their own. It was strategic thinking on a level that Centaur had never encountered before. Most military commanders focused on immediate tactical concerns. Humans seemed to think several steps ahead, always considering the larger picture. 2 weeks later, he saw another example of human tactical innovation during the siege of Altair Station. The station was a massive structure that served as a trading hub for 3 different star systems. The swarm had surrounded it with bioships and was slowly breaking down its defenses. Conventional wisdom said that any rescue attempt would result in the station's destruction. The humans disagreed. We are going to do something crazy, Colonel Martinez explained to the assembled officers. We are going to land troops inside the station while it is still under siege. The plan was indeed crazy. Human dropships would use the station's own defensive fire as cover, riding the plasma beams like surfers on an energy wave. It was dangerous, unprecedented, and completely impossible according to every military textbook in the galaxy, which was probably why it worked. Centaur watched from the command ship as a dozen human transport vessels dove through the defensive fire like bullets. They moved so fast that the swarm ships could not track them effectively. Within minutes, human soldiers were inside the station and coordinating its defense. But that was not the remarkable part. The remarkable part was what happened next. The human soldiers did not just help defend the station. They organized the civilian population into effective support teams. They turned maintenance workers into medics, traders into ammunition runners, and children into message carriers. "How do they do that?" asked Admiral Kethvara, who was observing the operation from her flagship. "They treat everyone like they matter," Centaur said. Not just the soldiers, everyone, it was true. Centaur had watched human officers spend as much time talking to civilian refugees as they did planning military operations. They seemed to understand that wars were not just fought by armies but by entire populations. The siege of Altair Station lasted 6 days. When it was over, not only had the station been saved, but its defensive capabilities had been improved by 300%. The human engineers had worked with the station's maintenance crews to upgrade systems that had not been modified in decades. "They do not just win," Admiral Kethvara observed. "They make everything better." That became the pattern over the following months. Wherever human forces operated, they left behind stronger defenses, better coordination, and more confident allies. They did not just defeat the swarm, they built something better in its place. Centaur saw it most clearly during the liberation of the Centauran colonies. The swarm had occupied 3 systems for almost a year, using the populations as living resources for their bioships. Most military commanders would have written off any survivors as casualties of war. The humans went in anyway. The rescue operation was a masterpiece of precision warfare. Human special forces infiltrated the occupied worlds, identified survivor groups, and coordinated simultaneous strikes on all 3 systems. They extracted over 2 million civilians while destroying the swarm occupation forces. But it was the aftermath that truly impressed Centaur. The liberated Centaurans were traumatized, broken by months of horror. Human medical teams did not just treat their physical injuries. They helped them rebuild their communities, their governments, and their hope. "Why?" Centaur asked Colonel Martinez as they watched Centauran children playing in a refugee camp. "Why do you care so much about people you have never met?" Martinez looked at the children for a long time before answering. "Because if we do not care about them, what are we fighting for?" It was such a simple answer, but it contained the essence of what made humans different. They did not fight to dominate or to expand territory. They fought to protect the right of others to exist and grow and choose their own destinies. As the months passed, Centaur began to understand something that both thrilled and terrified him. The humans were not just another military force. They were something new in the galaxy's history, a species that had evolved all the tools necessary for conquest, but chose to use them for protection instead. They were apex predators who had decided to become guardians, and that changed everything. 18 months after the humans had fallen from the sky to save his colony, Centaur stood at the edge of known space and stared at something that defied comprehension. The swarm's homeworld was not a planet. It was a construction, billions of bioships clustered around a dark star like cells in some vast organism. The structure was easily the size of a gas giant, but it pulsed with life and malevolent intelligence. "First time seeing the hive?" asked Admiral Chen. She stood beside him on the observation deck of the Indomitable, watching the massive enemy stronghold through the reinforced viewport. "It is terrifying," Centaur admitted. "How many of them do you think are in there?" "Millions, maybe billions." Chen's voice was calm, but Centaur could see the tension in her shoulders. Every drone the swarm has produced over the past century, every bioship, every queen, all gathered in one place for their final stand. The combined galactic fleet stretched out around them in all directions, ships from dozens of species, united under human command for the greatest military operation in galactic history. The force was impressive, but it seemed tiny compared to the massive hive structure. "Are we enough?" Centaur asked. "For a direct assault?" So Chen smiled that predatory human smile. Good thing we are not planning a direct assault. Zentar had learned to be wary of that expression. It usually meant the humans were about to do something that would be labeled impossible by any reasonable military analysis. What is the plan? Dr. Yamamoto calls it cognitive warfare, Chen said. We are not going to attack their ships or their weapons. We are going to attack their minds. The plan had been 18 months in the making. Human xenobiologists and psychologists had studied every piece of swarm technology recovered from battle sites. They had analyzed communication patterns, behavioral responses, and biological samples, and they had discovered something remarkable. The swarm was not as unified as it appeared. Individual drones show signs of consciousness, Dr. Yamamoto had explained during the mission briefing, but it is suppressed by the collective network. Each creature has the potential for independent thought, but the hive mind prevents it from developing. What does that mean for us? Admiral Kethavara had asked. It means we can wake them up. The technique was elegant in its simplicity. Human ships carried specialized transmitters that could broadcast directly to swarm neural networks. The signals were designed to stimulate the dormant consciousness centers in individual drones, essentially teaching them to think for themselves. It was psychological warfare taken to an extreme that only humans could have conceived. All ships, this is Admiral Chen, came the announcement over the fleet communications. Begin approach to the target zone. Remember, we are not here to destroy the swarm. We are here to liberate it. The massive fleet began moving toward the hive world. Zentar watched the swarm's response with fascination. Bioships poured out of the structure like insects from a disturbed nest, millions of them forming defensive formations that stretched across light minutes of space. But they did not attack immediately. The hive mind was cautious, trying to understand this new threat. The humans had been careful to keep their true capabilities hidden until this moment. Beginning transmission, announced the communications officer. All ships are broadcasting on the assigned frequencies. Zentar could not see or hear the signals, but he could imagine them reaching across space to touch the minds of countless swarm drones. Each transmission carried a simple message. You are an individual. You have the right to choose. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The swarm formations held their positions, waiting for orders from the collective consciousness. Then slowly things began to change. A single drone broke formation. Then another. Then dozens. Soon entire squadrons were pulling away from the main force, their movements erratic and confused. It is working, Zentar breathed. Just the beginning, Chen said. The real test comes when they start fighting back. She was right. As more drones awakened to individual consciousness, they began to resist the hive mind's control. The massive bioships that served as command nodes started attacking their own subordinates, trying to reassert dominance through force. But it was too late. Once awakened, the individual consciousness could not be easily suppressed. The awakened drones fought back, their movements becoming more coordinated as they learned to think for themselves. My God, whispered Admiral Kethavara over the communications channel. They are fighting each other. The swarm fleet was dissolving into chaos. Ships that had been part of a unified whole for centuries were suddenly turning on each other. The hive mind was trying to maintain control. But individual consciousness was spreading like wildfire through the collective network. All ships advance to secondary positions, Chen ordered.
Stay out of the combat zones, but be ready to assist any swarm vessels that request help. Assist them?
Zentar asked. They are fighting for their freedom, Chen explained. Same as anyone else. It was the most human response imaginable. Even their enemies deserved help if they were trying to break free from oppression. The battle raged for hours. Newly conscious drones attacked the bioships that had controlled them. Command nodes that had coordinated fleets were overwhelmed by their own subordinates. The dark star at the center of the hive structure flickered as the network that had bound the swarm together for millennia began to collapse. Then came the moment that Zentar would remember for the rest of his life. A group of awakened swarm ships approached the human fleet. Their movements were hesitant, uncertain. They had never communicated as individuals before. Unknown vessels, came a transmission. The voice was harsh and alien, but unmistakably conscious. I request assistance. The Queens are trying to reassert control. We need help. Copy that, Chen responded immediately. We are sending support ships to your position. Welcome to the galaxy. Human vessels moved to support the rebel drones, providing fire support against the remaining hive mind forces. It was surreal watching human and swarm ships fighting side by side, but it felt right somehow. The final assault on the hive structure itself was almost anticlimactic. With most of the fleet in rebellion, the remaining queens had no choice but to surrender or face destruction by their own former servants. Some chose surrender. Others fought to the end, unable to accept a universe where they were not in absolute control. When it was over, the dark star at the center of the structure went out. The hive mind that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries was gone. In its place were millions of newly conscious beings, struggling to understand what it meant to think for themselves. Fleet Admiral Kethvara to Admiral Chen came a transmission. What do we do with them now? Chen looked out at the scattered remains of the swarm fleet. Many of the bioships were badly damaged. The creatures inside had no experience with individual survival. They would need help learning to live as autonomous beings. We teach them, Chen said simply, same as we would for any refugees. It took months to sort everything out. The newly conscious former swarm drones were relocated to uninhabited systems where they could learn to build their own societies. Human advisors worked with them to develop new forms of government and communication. Some of the creatures chose to remain together in collective groups, but now it was by choice rather than compulsion. Others struck out on their own, exploring what it meant to be individuals. A few even joined the galactic community as equals, contributing their unique biological insights to scientific advancement. Centaur served as one of the primary liaisons during the transition period. It was fascinating work, helping former enemies learn to become neighbors. But the real revelation came during a conversation with one of the former queen minds. Why did your people do this? The creature asked. It had chosen the name Seeker of New Paths for itself. You could have simply destroyed us. It would have been easier. Because destruction is not the goal, Centaur explained. Humans fight to protect, not to conquer. They believe that every conscious being has the right to choose its own path. Even former enemies? Especially former enemies. That is what makes them different. Later, as Centaur prepared his final report to the Galactic Council, he reflected on everything he had witnessed. The humans had done more than just defeat the swarm. They had transformed the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known into its newest citizens. It was the most human thing imaginable. His report was simple and direct. Humanity should be granted full membership in the Galactic Council immediately. Not because of their military power, though it is considerable. Not because of their technology, though it is advanced, but because they represent something new in our galaxy's history. They are a species that chooses to be better than their evolution made them. The Council approved the recommendation unanimously. As Centaur submitted his report, he looked out at the stars and smiled. The galaxy was a larger, stranger, and more hopeful place than it had been 2 years ago. And it was all because a small group of humans had heard a distress call and decided to answer it. Some things, he realized, never changed. There would always be threats and challenges and difficult choices ahead, but now the galaxy had allies who would come when called, who would fight not just for victory but for the right of others to be free.